Welcome to Hey Ghost Hey, the podcast about ghosts, ghost hunting, and other paranormal phenomena of the Pacific Northwest. I am your host, Charles Crooks, owner, tour guide, and psychic of Bellingham Ghost Tours. We are here because I like ghosts a lot. Now let's begin. Hello, and welcome to another episode. I hope you had a wonderful Halloween, and even though Halloween is over, thankfully the ghosts don't go away and that they are year-round for us. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about a location that I was actually drawn to for the history of it, and I went in blind without knowing any paranormal possibilities about it. And I'm talking about Marine Park, which is located at the end of Harris Avenue in the historic Fairhaven district. And if you've never been, I highly recommend it. It's not just a beautiful area, but it's a wonderful place to just kind of hang out. They have a little kind of covered pavilion there if you want to have events or parties. And then it's a wonderful spot for sunsets. It's also where the ski to sea race ends every year. But then also it has a little bit more going on historically that I find very interesting. So I'm going to share with you this article that came from Whatcom Talk. Throughout Fairhaven's history, the name Dead Man's Point emerges as a curious footnote. It refers to a hill that became one of Fairhaven's vanished landmarks by its leveling in the early 20th century. Why the morbid name? The name may lie in Fairhaven's origins, either an undocumented first contact or the town founding. Coast Salish people historically used the Patton Creek Inlet for hunting, fishing, and foraging over thousands of years. Fairhaven historic markers note not only ancient camps from 1500 BC in the vicinity, but legend, Spanish massacred here in the 1600s. This marker near the interurban trail has prompted confusion. Did Spanish contact occur here over 100 years before the 1792 Vancouver expedition? Well, shrouded in legend, the area's history and name origins echo a haunted past that never quite stays dead. The Spanish massacre marker sources back to the turn-of-the-century newspaper articles. A 1936 Bellingham Herald article attributes the story to Lummi oral tradition, dating it to several years before Vancouver's flagship poked its nose through the waters of the North Pacific. This timeline more closely matches known Spanish fortifications at Nootka Island and Nia Bay. The article details how 400 Spanish marauders and galleons died in the battle with a 1,000-fold confederation of Coast Salish and other Puget Sound tribes led by the Nisqually. Subsequently, the Spanish established an inlet fortification that became their tomb. The Fourth Corner by Leah Jackson Edson reiterates this account, adding, "For years the outlines of the old fortifications were plainly visible, as were the burial grounds from which many skeletons were exhumed, and proven by experts to be the remains of Spanish cavaliers, befitting the name Dead Man's Point." The 1936 article describes Spanish pirates, which may explain the event's lack of documentation, if true. Another marker, Spanish chalice dated 1640 found here, may explain the 1600s discrepancy. A 1908 Bellingham Herald article titled "Bellingham Man Digs Up Spanish Urn, 1630, attributes the find to one Lee L. Rose unearthing it in his backyard. The article calls this proof of the fact that Spanish galleons visited this shore hundreds of years ago, and notes previous discoveries of plates from the vessels, sides, and skeletons pronounced to be those of Spaniards. A 1919 Bellingham Herald article, Dead Man's Point is Now Nothing But Memory, states that various finds were reported over the years, including indigenous remains mentioned here. In Spanish artifacts, a chalice said to bear the date of 1640. Where any of these ended up is unknown. While this article accounts for the alternate date given for the chalice and the timeline confusion if only the artifact dates to the 1600s, it confirms also how the alleged proof is lost to legend. The hill gained numerous nicknames from the 1850s until its leveling by 1919. The name Poe's Point originates with Alonzo Poe, who built a cabin there before Dirty Dan Harris purchased 43 acres in 1858. Other sources attribute the Dead Man's Point name to an 1857 raid where 2 lookouts died. The land became Graveyard Point when Dirty Dan Harris sold portions for a county cemetery. In 1889, the county reinterred 64 bodies into Bayview Cemetery. The name Commercial Point emerged as demolition starting in 1890 made way for the Great Northern Railway and Pacific American Fisheries Cannery. Bellingham Herald articles up to 1919 describe bodies and coffins from the former cemetery washing up or unearthed, and indigenous remains including skulls almost flat from the forehead back. Present-day Marine Park stands at the former site of the landmass, with historical signage describing Poe's Point and a timeline of events. It started in 1971 after the Port of Bellingham purchased PAF land in 1966. Over 100 years since the documented reports of artifacts, the mystery remains. As another Herald article describes, there is a spirit of activity at the end of the bay. There is a rattling of dry bones, as it were, and nature's monument, an irregular mix of soil, sand, gravel, and rock. The hum of the wheels of industry will take the place of the sound of the waves swishing against the shore. All right, and once more, that was coming from the article Dead Men Tell No Tales, The Lost Legends of Fairhaven's Dead Man's Point, in Whatcom Talk, and this was written by Anna Deal. So thank you, Anna, for that lovely and comprehensive history that was all put together. It's interesting to note that especially when you do look up the history of Marine Park, of Dead Man's Point and everything for that area, some people almost kind of erase out the indigenous part of the story, while other people have definitely made it much more of a focus. And so I do think it is very important to understand about all of the indigenous graves that were absolutely desecrated in the name of making this railway and just kind of leveling out the land there. So it is something to be very noted of, even though it is now a very popular destination and a very lovely one. We do have that history to it. And so because of that history, I wanted to find out if there is anything going on down at Marine Park, if there's anything going on in that space. Even in the times I visited in the past, I've never had any sort of sense of dread or death or anything feeling kind of ominous out there. To me, it feels just like a very good park, a good space. But I was still very curious because of the history, if it does lead credence to almost kind of haunting energy or things that are kind of lingering out there. And so I went out 2 different times to see what I could find, and had 2 interesting things happen each time. So I'm going to start with the second time that I went. I'd gone by myself, and I ended up sitting in my car for most of the investigation as it has started to rain on and off. And I just started to use the devices that I had around me, one of them being the Ovilus. And so it's believed that the Ovilus will pick up very sensitive measurements in the air and the environment and the surroundings, and then you can use those measurements to translate into words. So supposedly the spirits can like make these fluctuations in the environment to translate that into words to communicate with us. And I will say, when I first got the Ovilus, everywhere I took it or anytime I tried to use it, I might have gotten one or two words that seemed to kind of correlate, but never really anything that would really give like chunks of words or anything that would really seem to match where we were or kind of give intelligence to seem like it would match with what was going on. And so at this time, I got a few interesting words using the Ovilus that came through. And as the words were coming through, I didn't have any other direct personal experiences at the time, but some of the words that it did give were murder, killer, and stabbed. And so I do find that very interesting, especially for the story that I mentioned in the article about the two lookouts that were murdered. And through other sources, in looking into that further, I believe the story goes that there were two men in a cabin, and they both got drunk one night, completely passed out, and then they were killed by natives that were going around in the area. And so whether the Ovilus words refer to that incident, I have no idea, but it's definitely interesting because it's one of the few times where it seems to start connecting the words to either what's going on or what's in the history of the space. So after the words that came through the Ovilus seemed to correlate with some of the history, I continued to wait around, but nothing much happened. So I started to pull out one of the apps on my phone. It has an SLS camera, and that's very similar to what you've probably seen on the TV shows when they go around with a Xbox Kinect camera, or at least that's how it started in popularity. And it kind of shows the stick figures on the screen. So the idea is that if the camera identifies the figure of a person, it will show that person in stick figure form on the camera, even though you can't see them with your eyes. So I was trying to get this set up on my phone, and as I was doing so, I saw someone walk directly by the side of my car, by the driver's side door, and it made me jump because I was so startled. And so immediately I put my phone down, made it go dark, and there was no one around me, but I clearly saw the shadow or the figure of someone walking by. And so after that, that was all I had happen for the second night, but unfortunately it did not yield any evidence. So going back to the first night that I went to investigate Marine Park, I actually went with a few of my coworkers from Still Life Massage and Float. And if you do need relaxation in your life, that is a wonderful place to go. They have the float take deprivation pods, wonderful massage therapists, and even a sauna. So if you need relaxation, please go check out Still Life and get it in your life. But back to the more ghostly things. So during the investigation, my coworkers, Simon, Katie, and myself had branched off from the rest of the group, and we were walking towards the edge of the park near the water, and we had something interesting happen. Initially, really nothing was being experienced. We weren't having a whole lot of activity going on. We were having some interesting words coming through the Ovilus. And as I was just kind of hanging out by the water, Simon then called out my name and said that he had asked for something around him to give a sign. And as soon as he did so, he got the word around on the Ovilus. And so we had really nothing else happen around that other than kind of having that coincidence happen of timing. But after I went home and I listened to my recorder, something very interesting popped up. So I'm just going to share that clip and that whole experience with you guys. It's kind of... Yeah?
I said, if you're out here, will you give me a sign? And it said around.
All right, so you probably noticed right in the beginning, there was that really interesting howl noise. And so I have no idea if that was animal, if that was human, if that was human mimicking animal. I really cannot tell. And none of us heard that with our ears at the time. I checked with Simon, I checked with Katie, and no one has any remembrance of hearing that howl noise at all. And I even checked with the rest of the group that was separated from us, and no one had any memory of hearing that at the time. We even did have a dog with us in the group, and at one point she ran off barking, but she did not howl at all. So we were all very, very sure that that noise did not come from anyone in the group. So here it is one more time. It's kinda... Yeah?
I said, if you're out here, will you give me a sign? And it said around.
What I really like, not just being able to hear the howl, but it's really the succession of all the events together and how they kind of happened with the evidence of not being heard at the time, but also having that experience with the device. So overall, I could have not been happier that I got this. And honestly, it's one of the very first EVPs that I've gotten in many years, especially since I've started to get into investigating again. So I was absolutely thrilled. And I know my friends were too, especially to actually experience something, or at least find that we experienced something later on. It's so exciting. And it's, even though something so small, it's still one of the big reasons why I do this. All it really does is seem to add to the mystery of what's going on. So here's that howl. I'm going to loop it 2 more times for you guys, just the howl part itself. So one last time, here's that howl from Marine Park. All right. I hope that you have found that as interesting as I have. I really love just the absolute possibility that comes with EVPs and what you might get from, and really just the great variation that they give you, from the whispers to the full-on words or voices to the random sounds of even objects sometimes. Like in this case, whether it's a human or animal voice vocalized, I'm not sure, but either way, I find it absolutely exciting. And it really, when you find something, it makes all of that waiting for ghost hunting worth it. So once again, I hope you guys enjoyed, but that is going to wrap up this episode of Hey Ghost Hey. Thank you so much for being here. Again, I hope you had a wonderful Halloween. And if you want more ghostly things, you can follow me on Instagram, Bellingham Ghost Tours, or on TikTok by the same name. Again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you again next week for another episode of Hey Ghost Hey. Thanks so much, and stay spooky, my friends.